It's getting close to potato time, and today I'm going to talk about chitting potatoes, when and how to do it. And I'm also going to be talking about growing in the now very popular 30-litre pots and how I do that. I will also talk about the different interpretations of each method and how I do it. And I'll also be talking towards the end about the trials I'm doing this year, using all of that information to see if there's anything that I'm missing out on. Now, a little bit of history from my own personal archives, i.e. up here, my noggin. Many decades ago, we always had our seed potatoes stored away well before Christmas. And that would be a mixture of what we got from potato merchants and if we were saving our own seed from our own crop. And you would keep them somewhere cool, dark, frost-free. You don't want them to freeze because that will destroy the potatoes. You want them dark because you don't want them to start chitting too early because that will exhaust the potato. So you kept them out of the way. Now, in the natural scheme of things, as the weather at this time of year starts to warm up, you will start to see tiny green flecks on the eyes of the potato. That is the chit starting, and that is the signal, or that was the signal for us to then put them out into light to start to grow chits. Now, simply because if you left them in the dark, they would just grow very long and etiolated and all white and horrible. The moment you put them in soil, they broke off and they would have to regrow. Which leads me to another thing. There is a thought that if you rub off chits on a potato, only the ones that remain will grow. Well, that's bunkum, really, because their eyes will just regrow. They'll just sap more energy from the tuber. If you want to grow less stems on a potato, cut it up so it's only got 2 eyes on it if you want 2 stems. But anyway, that's how we used to do it, and it's pretty much still how I do it these days. Then what's happened since then is, over the years, gardeners have realised that with the greenhouses that most gardeners started to get hold of in the sort of 60s and 70s, gardeners could then start to afford, they started to have disposable income to buy a greenhouse, and they realised that if you chitted some first early in the year, you brought them into the house, put them on a windowsill and encouraged them to grow chits, you could get an early crop of new season potatoes by growing them in a sack in a greenhouse. And I think that has spread, and somebody saw somebody chitting potatoes and then chitted all their potatoes, and I think personally that's how that information has spread. But that's how I do it, is I wait for the green flecks to come on the potatoes in the eyes, and then I'll bring them out into the light. And my issue with it is that for the average gardener, I mean, I've got polytunnels and greenhouses galore. I can chit them if I wanted to quite easily. I have the space to do it. But many gardeners do not have the space to do that. They may only have one windowsill in the house, and if that's full of seed potatoes chitting away happily, they can't get any other seeds going. It's just used all your room up, because there is this thing that you must chit your potatoes. I don't think you need to, but I don't know if I'm missing anything out by doing that. I have chitted in the past. I've chitted new potatoes to get them going, and I have chitted on a few years the whole crop, and I didn't see any noticeable difference. So yeah, it's a tough one to answer, and there are many people out there who are in the chitting camp and many who aren't, and I think a lot of people also do it because that's what their forebears did. Their mothers, their fathers, their grandfathers have always chitted their potatoes, so that's how it goes on. Now, these are the 30-litre pots that I'll be growing all my potatoes in this year. The 30-litre pots with handles, and they're full of compost. And the compost I recycle, reuse. After 6 weeks, the feed's gone from that. So it becomes a soil medium, it's a growing medium. And I use that for about 4, sometimes 5 years, just to keep the costs down. And every year I might add a bit of muck, a bit of rotted down manure, or some more compost just to top them up. But I plant 2 tubers per bucket. I put a couple of inches of compost in the bottom, 2 tubers, and then I either fill them all the way up or I fill them as the plants grow, and I've done both methods, no difference. So now I fill them up, and I will on occasion add a bit more rotted down manure, but I'll always put some feed in. I'll always put half a handful of bloodfish and bone in, or potato feed pellets, which you can also get hold of online. Now I use the 2 tubers, and if you like, put them north and south in the bucket as you look at it. But I know many other people actually use 4 tubers, and they seem to get good results. So they'll put compost in, 2 tubers north and south, bit more compost, 2 more tubers east and west in the pot, so that they're not sort of colliding with each other, which is a good way of doing it. But my issue with that is I think they're overstepping the mark of the buckets. Now, don't get me wrong, and you've got to watch the video all the way to the end to see my conclusions on this. I think there's an amount of potatoes that a seed potato will yield. Therefore, that's why I grow 2 in a bucket and swear by it, because on average you'll get about 3.5 pounds of potatoes from 1 tuber if you go grow it in the ground. 2 tubers in a bucket, 7 pound of potatoes is a good bucket. There are exceptions to that, and I've had buckets to well over 10 pounds before growing 2 tubers, as I know many other people have who have 4 tubers. But it depends what you want to grow. The majority, not all, the majority of the buckets I've seen on sort of YouTube or on websites, wherever, where people are growing 4 tubers to a bucket, they're getting much smaller potatoes. Now, I prefer bigger potatoes because I want them for baking, or I just want less peeling to do and easier peeling when it comes down to it. So I want to grow bigger potatoes out of preference. But also there is an issue with the space that you're using and the amount of tubers that you grow in that space. And I'm going to illustrate that now, and I'll go cut and we'll move on to the next bed. Right, I'm going to be throwing some figures, some numbers at you now, but I will put it all on the screen in an understandable way. Now, when it comes to planting potatoes in the ground, as we've all done for many decades if you've been a gardener for that long, there are distances for planting your potatoes apart in the ground to maximise the yield and the space that that plant can grow in. Now, for first earlies, over recent years, that's diminished to 12 inches apart in rows 12 inches apart, which is the representation of this bed here. Each seed label on here represents a first early potato planted to get the best yield out of that potato and the space that's there. And I can tell you, because I've counted them, I put them in, there's 45 labels there, which represents 45 tubers. Now, last year I grew potatoes in my buckets in there, and I got 33 containers in there, each with 2 tubers in, and that's now 66 tubers in a ground which is best for 45 tubers. So I've added another 20 tubers on there, and it's exactly the same ground or space as the buckets. So we're already overstepping the marks with the buckets. If I was to put 4 tubers in each, that now becomes 132 tubers in a space in the ground where I've got 45. Do you see where I'm getting at? Now, if they were main crop spacing, you can knock out 1 complete row of those. So there's now only 30 tubers in that bed, basing that on the RHS best planting spacings for potatoes. Now only 30, but you're putting 132 tubers into buckets in that space to grow. And this is my issue with it, is how can you suddenly quadruple the amount of tubers that you can grow in the ground just simply because you're growing in a bucket? To me, that doesn't make logical sense. I've tried it, and all I found I got was smaller tubers. The closer you plant a potato to another one, the smaller the tubers you get. If you plant your tubers ridiculous amounts of space apart, 30 inches apart for a main crop, you will get big tubers because that's the recommended space, and it works. So this is my issue in the difference between the buckets and the beds. But I'm not finished there really, because I see everyone every year planting the 4 tubers, and I think, am I missing something? I've tried it in the past and it didn't quite work, but I'm going to do another test this year, and I'm going to do a test in line also with the chitting I described earlier, because if you don't test these things, you'll never know properly. I've done tests in the past and it didn't work out, but they were in the ground. I'm now growing in buckets, so I want to see what difference, if any, there is. So we'll go and talk about the test now. Now, I'm going to start some potatoes chitting this afternoon. I'll get them into some trays in the greenhouse on the bench there to start them chitting. I will also put the rest of my seed potatoes away into the shed as I normally do, wait for the green flecks to appear that I discussed earlier, and then from there I will then put those out into the light, and then I'll come down and plant them. I will have 12 pots at the back which are chitted and 12 pots at the front that are unchitted. I'm also going to test this theory of the 4 potatoes versus the 2 potatoes. So the first 6 here, these 6, will have 4 tubers in, the next 6 2. So that I'm combining a test, still get a crop from it, but find out which is the better for me for what I want to grow, whether they are all small tubers, whether that's a fallacy that I've just seen, or whether I get a better crop from the 4 than I do from the 2, and whether the chitted makes a difference, because they'll all be harvested at the same time. I just want to see where I'm up to so that next year I can go bang and I know exactly what I'm doing. And that's the only reason I'm doing this test. It's not to prove anyone wrong, it's not to say I told you so or this works better and you should try this. It's purely for me and my benefit. But I thought it was be nice to include everyone who watches the channel so you can see the extents that I will go to find out what works best for me. I'm prepared to do those tests and find out, and then analyse the results and see where I'm at. So there we go, that's the potato trial. So what potatoes am I growing this year? I've got 3 types. Charlotte as normal. King Edward, I would not be without that. That's the king of roast potatoes there. And I've got Sarpo. Now, I've got a 2 kilo bag of that. I ordered 20 kilos and they sent me 2. They have corrected it and sent me another 20. So I've bought those because I'm sharing them with a couple of people down here. Now with the chitting, you grab a potato, you've got 2 ends on a potato. You'll see one has more eyes on than the other, and to chit them you just simply work out which is the rose end and stand them up like that. It's just so you can get a whole load of potatoes stood up in the light to get them started. And it's not much more difficult than that. And then you just leave them in a light, keep them frost free, that's very important. You don't want them getting frosted, it'll knacker them. And that is simply all there is to it with chitting. That's all you got to do. Now just leave them in the light. So I'll be doing that straight away with the amount of Sarpos I need for those buckets, and all the rest of my potatoes will go away in the shed until those green shoots appear. Then they'll come out and they'll go into trays, and I'll probably put them in these mushroom trays. You can get a load in there and stack them up and whatnot. So there we go. Oh, one more thing is if you do put them out in an unheated greenhouse and a frost is predicted, just bring them in overnight, put them back out the next morning. There we go, chitting easy. So last year was the first year for me of growing all my potatoes in buckets and not growing any in the ground, and it's the first year for decades that I've never put a potato in the ground. So new territory for me, and it's hence why I'm doing this testing. As I said earlier, I'm not trying to prove or disprove anything one way or the other. I just want to see what is best for the way I'm growing potatoes now, and hence why I'm doing these tests. Otherwise I will continue as I have done, just waiting for the green flecks to come on the potatoes, put them out into the light and then planting them. I mean, you have to remember the farmers don't chip potatoes, they just put them straight in the ground and they grow, and they seem to do all right by it, so who am I to argue with that? But anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've got something from it, and I hope the facts and figures didn't baffle you too much. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this works out this year. Hopefully it works out well. and get a good crop, and that's what matters really. But then we can assess the results at the end of the year and see where we're at. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please look after yourselves and stay safe, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Ta-ra now.